I have no bitterness, no rancor at all. I say to the President, as a fellow politician, that he did a wonderful job. He put together a vote total that's larger than has ever been gained in this country.
There's an old saying in the Talmud, we do not see things as they are. We see things as we are. Makes me wonder about a lot of what I'm watching going on. I'll tell you, once again, I say this a lot, but sometimes I mean it, sometimes I don't. Some of you aren't going to like what I say today, and it's going to piss you off. Like I've said on many occasions, you can be pissed off if you want, you can be mad at me, but let's argue about the substance, not call each other names and all that kind of stuff. See the world as it is. We don't see the world as it is. We see it as we are. As we watch what's happening right now in our country, I find myself asking myself, am I really seeing things as they are? Or am I seeing things the way I wish they wanted to be? Or the way I want them to be? That didn't even come close to right, did it? You get the idea. Once upon a time, there was a Republican presidential candidate who everyone expected to win. He wasn't just expected to win, he was literally one of the most popular people in the country at the time. He was well thought of, he was well spoken, he was intelligent, he was beloved. He was also an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court. That had never happened before. He had been asked to run by numerous people because he was seen as the only person who could actually unite the country and get us moving in the right direction. His opponent was seen as very soft on international dictators and was actually running his campaign on the theme, I kept you out of the war, and I'll keep you out of the war. All the while knowing during his campaign that he wasn't going to do that. In fact, Woodrow Wilson, who was the sitting president at the time, was so certain that he was going to have to go to war in World War I that he actually had a plan in place that if he lost the election in 1916, he was going to name his opponent, Charles Hughes, as Secretary of State immediately. Now, why would that matter? Well, because then, since he was the secretary, he would be the Secretary of State, he was now, at that time, third in line for the presidency. And Hughes was known for wanting to go to war. He was very belligerent about Germany, very, very upset with the fact that Wilson seemed to be dragging his feet, getting America ready for the war for democracy. And so he was going to name, he had a plan. He was going to name him, if he lost, as Secretary of State, and then he and his vice president were going to resign, elevating Hughes to the presidency months before he would actually have been scheduled to do so. Wilson was very concerned about this lame duck into March thing and thought what would be best for the country. Now look, Woodrow Wilson, not one of my heroes by any stretch of the imagination, but it's intriguing to me that he had a plan to do what was best for the nation if he lost. Hughes, likewise, I assume had some sort of plan. We know that he was leaning towards war. We know that he was leaning towards getting the United States into World War I at the time. And in what is one of the closest elections in the history of our country, really, I mean, it really was, Charles Hughes went to bed on election night believing that he had won the presidency of the United States in 1916, November 7th, 1916. He went to bed convinced that he was the next president. Whether he knew about Wilson's plan or not is unknown. But things started to happen. One of the mistakes that Hughes had made in the final days of his campaign was he had come to California. Gone to California. I'm not there anymore. He had gone to California, where a Republican governor held a Republican stronghold in California, or what was perceived as a Republican stronghold. And somehow or another, invitations got mixed up, people got confused, whatever happened. It was completely inadvertent. But you know how it is. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. The governor, Hiram Johnson of California, took Hughes's failure to come see him while he was in California as a grave insult. And so, in the final days of the campaign, he refused to endorse Hughes and refused to support him. He wasn't he wasn't pro-Wilson, but he didn't put the full effort into Hughes that he could have done. Wilson ends up winning California by 3,500 votes. 3,500 votes. Think about that. Even in 1916, that's not a whole lot of people. I mean, that's about as razor thin as it can get in a lot of ways. Well, because some ball got dropped somewhere and Hughes didn't go obsequiously bow down to Hiram Johnson, and so he didn't go, "You Republicans, get out there and work harder. It's very close." Hughes went to bed that night thinking he had won, but overnight, counts began to change and trends begin to shift. And in an era when they didn't necessarily have, voting machines or anything like that, they were actually counting ballots, it became clear by morning that it wasn't clear that Hughes was the winner. In fact, the newspaper people called up Hughes's place and asked to speak to him. Butler, who answered the phone, said, "The president is asleep. Can you call back?" He said, "Well, when he wakes up, tell him he's not the president." And hung up. Johnson would go on to refuse to concede the election. He is one of the few presidents in the modern era, certainly since 1892, to refuse to concede the election. This stalwart man, this man who was seen as a uniter, this man who was seen as the ultimate uniter in the country at that time, accused Wilson of voter fraud, accused election officials of cheating, went on rants about how unfair this whole thing was and how can I go to bed winning and then overnight suddenly they find a whole bunch of ballots for the Democrats and now Wilson's the president again and he's not ready to go to war and blah, 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 blah. I mean, it had to make, I wasn't there then, obviously, but it had to make people who knew Charles Hughes, it had to make them uncomfortable. Sure, they were angry. I mean, here's the closest election in American history. Even in the Electoral College, it was close. It was 3.5% in the popular vote. In fact, there were a lot of firsts in that election of 1916 that we've become very familiar with regards to court cases and accusations and things being thrown back and forth. But I think for myself, the idea that Charles Evan Hughes stood there and after all of this service that he had to our nation as a governor, as an associate justice of the Supreme Court, and by the way, he is going to go on after this to continue to serve this country. He is actually going to become Secretary of State under Hoover. And then he will be nominated by Hoover to become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So he'll actually go back to the Supreme Court where he will be the Chief Justice. This is a man who has served his nation. The idea of him just standing there petulantly stomping his feet saying, "Well, I went to bed, I was the president. When I woke up, I'm suddenly not," is a little uncomfortable, isn't it? Again, accusations of voter fraud and that sort of thing, it may well have happened. I don't know. I wasn't there. I know this. I can't prove it. And nobody who was there in 1916 could prove it. Nobody ever will. Just like nobody could prove voter fraud in 1960. And Richard Nixon, who lost that election, again, in a very close election, stood up and said, when his advisors were saying to him, demand recounts, he stood up to them and said, you know what? It's not what's best for the country. Yeah, Richard Nixon did that. I know. He would go on to not be quite as successful in life, but you have to admire at the time his willingness to say that. Barry Goldwater, roundly defeated in 1964 by Johnson, met with the television media and said, yeah, I sent the president congratulations. William Jennings Bryan, 1892, the American people have spoken and their word is law, he writes to McKinley. This idea that somehow or another, because it happened once in Florida, and I'm not really sure that we actually understand what really happened in Florida in 2000. The Supreme Court didn't really decide that George Bush was the president of the United States. The Supreme Court decided to uphold its precedent that the states decide who the electors are. Period. Florida decided that. But we're mad at the Supreme Court, or some of us are mad at the Supreme Court, which is not all that unusual. At the end of the day, you reach a point where things become obvious, even to those of us who see things as we are, rather than as things really are. So, what I'm saying to you right now, and I know you're not going to like this, you're not going to prove all of this stuff. This ridiculous fantasy of these watermarked ballots is just that. It's a ridiculous fantasy. It didn't happen. These ideas that somehow or another you're going to walk into a court somewhere, and I'm not even sure where, and prove that the Democrats cheated is, well, it's very Charles Evan Hughes-esque. You're standing there stomping your feet with your arms folded and holding your breath because you're mad about something that you can't actually prove. I know you don't like that. Hell, I don't like it. But you know what? What's best for this country? What's best for us as a people? That doesn't mean I like Joe Biden. It sure as hell doesn't mean I like his vice president. It doesn't mean that I think that Republicans should not campaign better, not choose better candidates, not do things better ways. It doesn't mean that I don't think any of that at all. In fact, most concession speeches tend to unite parties, and that's why sitting presidents do poorly in midterms, because the party that lost tends to go, hey, we need to get our act together. It unites the party. It strengthens it. It encourages it. It motivates it. I got a feeling this time, though, we're just not going to get that, are we? Those of you posting on social media, oh, this election's going to go into January. This election's going to go to that. It can't, folks. It just can't. There's no way that you can say to me that that's what's best for the country. Save your don't send me the emails or the text telling me that, because you're wrong. It's that simple. No, I don't like Biden. No, I didn't vote for him. I have a picture of my ballot. I can prove it. But at the same time, at some point, you have to see things as they really are. And unless you've got the proof of all this malfeasance, you got nothing. And even Charles Evan Hughes had to eventually go, you know what? 2 weeks after the election, damn it, I guess he won. And you know what? He's not ready for war. He's not ready to defend democracy. And of course, 3 months later, Wilson took us into war. And Charles Evan Hughes went back to the Supreme Court and did all his stuff later on that I don't have time to get into. We see things as we are, not as they are. And as we watch what's happening, and as we post about what's happening, as we talk about what happened, let's ask ourselves that simple question. What are we actually seeing? Are we seeing things the way we want them to be, the way we are, the fantasy that we have? Or are we seeing things as they really are? Because I'll tell you this, And you're not going to like it, but I'm going to tell you. You cannot, there's no way you can possibly effectively plan for what you're going to do in the future going forward if you're still pretending things are the way you want them to be. If you're still clinging to the past, to something that can't be undone, that can't be changed, to something that isn't the way you want it, that you want to see it. And you may not like that, but it's a bitch slap of truth, folks. And I don't like it either. But I choose to move forward. I didn't vote for Joe Biden. Won't vote for Kamala Harris. If Donald Trump ran again, I'd probably vote for him. But you know what? At the end of the day, the American people have spoken. And as William Jennings Bryan said, their word is the law.